All right, so now there's lots of tension in the room from that crazy dark little video. What's really funny is when I sent that to Ryan, who puts together our videos for the service, he was like, "That's the best video we've ever shown." He was like, "This is awesome." But some like, I'm really uncomfortable now, but that's okay. That's fine. Like I said, my name is Mike. I'm the lead pastor here, and we are starting a brand new series called "I Declare War." And here's the deal. The question of why are we doing this series and why are we kind of making this declaration of war and that sort of thing, and why do I think it's necessary, is because you're already in a war whether you want to be or not, so you might as well identify it and go for it and like pick a side. You know what I mean? I mean, pick a side because you're in a conflict, you're in a war, and that's just before you. Now, a lot of this content right here, I'll just tell you at the front of the series, a lot of this content comes from a book and a small group study that I took a small group through this summer called I Declare War. And so a lot of it comes from that book and that small group curriculum. I didn't make all this up or get all this myself, but I'm getting a lot of that from that. So I want to tell you that right up front. And you can also get the book if you'd like to and dissect it yourself. It's got some different angles and things in it. It's very good. Or the small group curriculum. Or you can go online and watch Levi Lusk, who originally wrote the book and did a series like this for his church as well. So those are available. Now, if you miss any week of what we're doing, you can also catch up on our website, TwoCities.Church, and you can check out what's going on there. So I want to tell you that right up front, the front of this series. But like I said, you're in a war, whether you want to be or not, and I believe it's time to declare your side and declare what war you're in. Now, it's time to declare war, but there are three sort of enemies that you have, or three battles that you struggle with, and this is just part of human nature. It's not like a specific to you thing or specific to me thing. It's just a thing, right? And so this thing is that there's three, and the three kind of conflicts that you're constantly with are the devil, which we don't talk a whole lot about the devil around here. We just believe that he's kind of, he's trying to mess with us and that sort of thing, but he's lost the war. So we don't need to spend a lot of time on him. We just need to be aware that he's trying to get us and that we don't need to give him the light of day. We don't need to give him a lot of thought. We don't need to give him a lot in our lives. We don't need to give him any ground in our life or authority, though he's trying to wedge his way in constantly, isn't he? Okay, so that's one part of conflict that you have and I have in our life. But that's not the primary conflict that I'm going to talk about today or even in this series. Now, you may have thought that may be where I was going, but that's not the primary conflict that I'm going to be talking about. The second one is the world, okay? So we have a war, and I'm not talking about like nature, like you watch Nat Geo and it's beautiful and all that kind of stuff. I'm not talking about the world as in creation. I'm talking about world more like a worldview that is kind of against God, a worldview that says he doesn't exist, he's not behind anything, he doesn't have any power, a worldview that is against belief in God. So that's kind of the world when Scripture talks about, don't have friendship with the world. He's talking about a worldview. He's not talking about specific individuals necessarily. Sometimes we take it that we were like, oh, that person is worldly. I'm just gonna, that's not kind of what he's talking about. All right, because he didn't do that. That wasn't the example he set. So the world is more of a worldview. Now the third conflict, and this is the conflict we're going to be kind of narrowing in on and kind of getting into during this whole series, is a conflict with ourselves. It's a conflict with ourselves. Now, I know that we all have conflict within ourselves. How do I know this? Because I have conflict within myself. And I'm just willing, and I'm betting that I'm not the only one. So if you ever have conflict within yourself, just give me one of these, right? I mean, if you ever have conflict within yourself, okay, I just want to know that I'm not alone in my journey and that this is going to make sense for everybody in the room. So if you've never experienced that conflict within yourself, I'd like to just sit down and interview you for a while and get to know kind of what's going on, what's operating there inside of you, that there's no conflict within yourself. Now, our tendency is this. It's self-sabotage. That's our natural tendency, is it not? Isn't it just like us to kind of set ourselves up to do something and then last second really sabotage the whole thing? I mean, maybe it comes from a place of feeling like you're not worth anything or feeling like this good thing couldn't possibly happen or maybe like I'm not good enough or that sort of thing. So we kind of pull out at the last second, or we feel like we're not involved and we just feel like, something's not right here. And so we have self-sabotage. sabotage. Now, I don't know if you saw this or you were involved in seeing any of this on social media, but in 2018, there was sort of a big social media prank, but it was also an art prank. There's a artist named Banksy. You guys know this artist's name? Okay. So, you know those big auctions with the most like outrageously priced pieces of art. You know what I'm talking about? Sotheby's, right? And they have these big auctions and they go for millions, these pieces of art. So this guy, he's an artist. His name's Banksy. And he kind of is a little anti-snobby art, okay? But he ends up producing it. And so it's kind of funny. So he created this piece of artwork that was being sold. And it was sold, the gavel came down, and it was $1.4 million. $1.4 million for this piece of art. And immediately when the gavel came down, this is what happened. And this is what the people saw. If we could play that. So you see, in the frame, the artist had installed a self-destruct paper shredder. And the moment the gavel came down, beep, 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 it just went down, and it was like self-sabotaged. And this is kind of an illustration of what happens in our life. We're right at that critical moment. It is your time to shine, and then beep, 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 and we are just shredding ourselves because of self-sabotage. And this is what Banksy, and he's kind of like, he made a statement. He wanted to make a statement about it and talk about how ridiculous it is, the amount of money we put into this stuff, and it should be sold for beauty, not for price, and all this kind of stuff. And so he had arranged for, at the moment of its sale, to destroy itself. Can you imagine being the person who just bought that painting for $1.4 million? The transaction is done. Now, what's really funny is security. Why was there security there that day? Security was there to protect the painting from the people. They didn't think they would need to protect the painting from the painting. And they come running out there and trying to save it and take it off the wall to what end? I'm not even sure where they took it, but everybody's just kind of like, I'd hate to be that guy, the guy who bought it. It's a pretty incredible story, but I think it's a lot of our story. It's your time to shine and self-destruct. You hit the button. You start shredding yourself. Have you ever had that rotation of negative thoughts about yourself right after you've committed to something? You're not good enough. They're going to find out. You don't know what you're doing. All those sorts of things, right? And you're self-destructing, you're self-sabotaging, you're believing these things. Because we can be our own worst enemy, can't we? I mean, we can be our own worst enemy. And I know you've got conflict in you. I know that there's difficulty in your mind and in your soul and in your heart, and you're struggling against those day after day after day. And maybe you go through seasons where it's just rough. And then you go through seasons where it's not as bad. But it's always sort of there. And so I'm not talking about, a difficulty that you're trying to make in your life. It's just your earthly, fleshly self warring against your new spiritual self. And when you have a new identity in Christ, he says you are whole, you are complete, you are worthy, all those kinds of things. You are loved. And then our sinful part of us, the flesh part of us, is like, no, you're not. No, you're not. No, you're not. And so there's this war, and there's these two kind of voices warring inside of you, and you have to choose which one you're going to reinforce and which one you're going to listen to. So here's some examples of some battles that you may struggle with that are very real and happen all over the place, right? We got anxiety, right? I feel like everyone struggles with some bit of anxiety, right? Everybody struggles with some kind of anxiety. Moodiness, you're just not the person you'd like to be. You're not having the mood that you'd like to be. It's swinging all over the place. You got suicidal thoughts, okay? Let me just tell you, like some people have these thoughts pop into their brain, just suicidal thoughts. Doesn't mean you're suicidal. You just need to not entertain those and like push them out real quick, okay? Some people have those thoughts a lot more than others though. And some people entertain them a lot more. Then you have overeating. Anybody? Overeating? Anybody ever like, oh, I'm so full? All the time, right? Then we have other numbing agents. You know what those are, all kinds of things that you can be addicted to, or things that are trying to fill a void, but it's like the empty carbs you slam and then you just feel bloated. It's like it's no good. You don't feel any good after it. Then you just have distractions. You just distract yourself. We're very good at that. We just distract yourself from reality and what's going on. So we enter into some sort of distraction. Now, let me tell you a story. It's more of a research, not a story, but in the Annals of Internal Medicine, which is a publication, there is a research article that was put out, and it was talking about how people react to and use prescription medication. Okay, and it said that, if you took 100 people, a third of those people will actually never fill the prescription. Then you have, roughly 67 people left about. And of those people, half those people will not follow the instructions properly on the packaging. So either they'll fill it, but they won't take it, or they'll take some of it and they don't realize they need it to build up in the system and complete its cycle. And so they just kind of toss it out once they feel good, or any number of different scenarios. And so they don't properly utilize the medication. And that's really interesting. Doesn't that just show how we just don't take care of ourselves very well? It just shows that we don't really follow through on those those things that kind of help us. And so we have difficulty doing that when it has something to do with ourselves. But you know what? There's a difference. There is one sort of medication that does get seen through all the way through, and gets almost done to a T, and it's when the RX is from a vet for your pet, okay? When you've got that scenario, it's like it is to the T, and you are upset if you miss that last dose, or if you lose it, or whatever. And I know that to be true because one of our dogs got fixed last Monday, and had 4 days of pain medication, and she had a couple of things. She also had a mass taken out of her shoulder, so she had a couple of spots that were sore, and so I was like making sure she got that medication. The first one, you better believe I put it in peanut butter, didn't I? Didn't I, right? I made sure she got it, and the last, she just ate it. I realized it just tastes good to her anyway, so she just ate it anyways, but I made sure she followed that thing because I want to make sure she was not in pain. And isn't that interesting that we are so invested in our pets, but we don't take care of ourselves very well? So, in this series, and what we're kind of getting to is we're going to be talking about 4 keys to winning the battle within ourselves. The 4 keys to winning the battle within ourselves. And so today I want to encourage you, and I'd like you to take out your phone if you've got one, or a pad of paper if you've got one, or something to write on or record on, or you can write it in the margin of your Bible if you'd like. But I want you to write the words somewhere: I declare war. I want you to make a declaration of war, a contract of conflict. It's there anyways, so just declare it. And I'm not talking about a thumb war where you're going to be like, I declare war. I'm talking about like you are ready to move forward. You are ready to make a decision. You are ready to tackle something that is holding you back, that is a battle within, that is sabotaging yourself. And so I'd like you to make that declaration today. And here's the thing about a declaration. A declaration is only good if your heart's in it, right? You can't declare something and then it'd be like, I don't really feel like it, You got to declare it and follow through. So nothing great has ever been done with half of someone's heart. Nothing great has ever been done with half of someone's heart. It's only when people are totally in, all in, sold out, gonna follow through, gonna do it, that something happens. You can't be half and half. So if you declare war, though, the wolf within will rise. The wolf within will rise. And you're like, what the heck does that mean? Now, I'm just quoting one of our past presidents, Teddy Roosevelt. If you've ever known anything about Teddy Roosevelt, if you read a biography or something, he's got a lot of stuff going on. He's like the first president to have a telephone, the first president to have electricity going through his house, the first president to do a lot of things, ride in a submarine, okay? First president to do that. He did a lot of things. He was the assistant secretary to the Navy at a certain point in time. He was also the only American at that time, or for a long time, to get the Nobel Peace Prize, to be nominated and get the Nobel Peace Prize. And he's also the only president to have gotten the Medal of Honor. He didn't get it while he was alive, but he was nominated while he was alive, and he got it after he had died. And in the Spanish-American War, he was in Cuba at the Battle of San Juan, and he was a part of a cavalry unit called the Rough Riders. That's right. Some history buffs. We have a local high school with the Rough Rider mascot, don't we? And there's a reason, because they were like just ferocious. And it was a volunteer cavalry. By the way, cavalry is different than cavalry. I know a lot of people get that mixed up. Cavalry is the mountain Jesus died on. Cavalry is a unit in the military using horses. So in this cavalry, they rode, and there was people who were Native Americans. There were people who graduated from Harvard, and it was a volunteer unit, and he was involved in that. And there's a moment that he writes in his journals about that battle where he finds himself on the ground. And it's one thing to want to be in war and be a part of that battle and feel like you're called to that. And then there's another thing to be on it and be facing that war in front of you. And he's on the ground, and he sees this barbed wire in front of him, and he has this mental choice. Am I going to declare and cross that barbed wire and go for it? Or am I going to kind of try to sneak off this battlefield and not? And he's got a moment where he's got to make a decision. And what he says in his journal is that the moment he made that decision, when he declared war in his heart, that he crossed those barbed wires, and it was like the wolf inside of him rose. And his friends and his mates and the people in his unit would describe him as a ferocious warrior that day, and he would go on to say it was the best day of his life. Now, I can't imagine making that kind of a choice in a real battlefield. But he did, and he said it was like the wolf inside me rose, and it was like I couldn't go back. And they took not only the hill of San Juan, but the next hill that day. And many people were very impressed with what he was able to do that day. Now, here's the objection you might have. I don't want to be a wolf. Wolves are bad. 3 Little Pigs told me that. They're bad. In fact, you look at some scripture even, and there's some scripture where they're not illustrated in a very good light, and they're kind of talked about negatively. And I understand those sentiments, but how like our enemy to make us write off an animal that God has created with attributes that you and I desperately need just by one illustration. Now, snakes are also seen as very bad in the Bible as well, and there's some stories around that. But however, Jesus says we need to be wise like snakes. So there's got to be, attributes that God would think are good to give that animal to allow them even to be here. And so I think there's some things that we might find good about wolves and the way that they work together and their camaraderie and the way they're like a family and their pack-like nature and the way they take care of one another and the way that they do things for one another and they take care of the young together and they are together and they are for each other and they love one another. In fact, their emotional range, the empathy they can have and all those sorts of things are beyond many of us, if you think about it. They are committed to one another, and they love one another. And you won't find a wolf alone. They travel together. There's strength in numbers. There's all sorts of things that are really great. So today, we're going to be talking about, and through this whole series, we're going to talk about 4 different traits that wolves have that we need to have. And the first one is to think like a wolf. To think like a wolf. To think with strength. To think with fortitude, to think with resolve that we are going forward together and we have declared war on the negativity in our own hearts. Now, the reason we start with thinking is there's a whole bunch of verses that kind of point to and make sure that our thinking is good. And so I'm just going to read a couple of those. And the first one, I'm going to do a throwback here. This is the New King James Version. I'm doing a throwback here. I don't usually come out of the New King James Version, but here we go. Proverbs 23 verse 7 says this, "For as he thinks in his heart, so he is." As a man or a woman thinks in their heart, so they are. And so that there's an emphasis in the Proverbs about having the correct kind of thinking, because your thinking dictates where else you go. So here's kind of the message in one sentence today. If you take nothing else, you can take a picture of this. If you sort of are struggling to stay awake, take a picture of this and look at it later. Okay, so here's the message in one sentence. It's you can change the way you feel by changing the way you think. You can change the way you feel by changing the way that you think. Don't you think that that's somewhat true in your life? Haven't you kind of seen that a little bit? See, negative thoughts can't lead to a positive life. Negative thinking can't lead to a positive outcome. It just doesn't happen that way. We start down that road, and that road erodes, and then we get in a ditch, okay, and we get stuck. Negative thinking can't lead to a positive life. Here's a couple other verses. Colossians chapter 3, verses 1 and 2. Since then you have been raised with Christ. Set your hearts on things above, where Christ is seated at the right hand of God. Set your minds on things above, not on earthly things, not on worldly things, not on the worldview against God. And there's sort of this calling to have a higher level of thinking, a higher way of thinking, and not to sink our thinking and have stinking thinking that kind of puts us into the wrong frame of mind. Okay, here's another one, Romans 12, verse 2, and I probably use this verse like once every 4 months in here, probably because I just think it's so good. Do not conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Then you will be able to test and approve what God's will is, his good, pleasing, and perfect will. If you want to know God's will for your life, don't be conformed to the pattern of this world, but think differently. Think his way. Be transformed by his level and way of thinking. It's a great, great reminder. Matthew 22, verse 37. You may know this verse. Maybe you don't know the address, but you probably know this verse. Jesus is talking about what's important. And he says, this is the most important thing. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. And a couple other translations or a couple other books actually add and strength. But here, you've got to use your mind for right thinking. Love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with your mind, with what you think about. Now, what I'm not saying it's all mind over matter. But what I am saying is that what happens in your mind really does matter. Where your thoughts hang out really do matter. Where you entertain your mind really does matter. Now, thoughts are going to pop in your head all the time. You can't control all the thoughts that pop in, but you control the ones that you kind of flesh out and the ones that you keep bringing to mind and the ones that you solidify by keeping thinking about it. So you can't control all the negative things that pop in your mind, but you certainly can throw them out when they don't line up with what you really, really want in your life. Now, positive thinking is not a replacement for God. I'm not saying that. That's kind of a new age thing. It is a response to God, though. It's a proper response to God based on who he is, what his character is, and what he's promised. Positive thinking and believing him and what he said is a response to God. It's a proper response in your thought life to God. See, here's what I know about you, and here's what I know about me. What you look for, you will find. Whatever you look for in life, you're going to find. In fact, there's a study done by a Stanford professor, Arnold Zwicky, and he has this kind of theory called the frequency illusion. And the frequency illusion has basically two parts to it. It has something called selective attention and then confirmation bias, okay? Now, I can illustrate this best by this. I have a Fiat 500e. It's a little car. People call it a clown car, a souped-up golf cart, all kinds of names. I really like it. And when I was thinking about getting it, I was thinking about it, and I was like, man, I really like one of those cars. And then I went out, and I got one. I went to CarMax. You don't have to haggle. Loved it. Just walked in, test drove it, took it home. You think it's going to be an hour later. Ends up being 4 hours later. just how it works, right? But you take it home, and this happens anytime you buy a new car or a used new car, or whatever you do, or you get a new car. What immediately happens is this: you drive off the lot, you're in your new car, and what do you automatically see on the road? All the same car. Right? All of a sudden, you're like, nobody has this car. This is awesome. I drive off the lot, and there's 6 next to me. I swear. It's just like right there. And you see all the same car. Now, the thing is, the same amount of Fiat 500Es were on the road before I got that car as after. It's just that my mind suddenly was like, look at that, look at that, look at that. Good decision, good decision. Everybody's got one. It's a good car. And it's like it's rewarding me for making that decision. And my subconscious is suddenly trying to find it. And when it finds it, it brings it to my attention. And then when it brings it to my attention, I go, yeah, I made a good choice. And I give that little subconscious a pat on the back, a little attaboy, and then it goes out and says, yes, master, I'm going to find more. And that's what it does. And that's called selective attention and confirmation bias. The same thing happens with you and with me. And it can happen in our negative thoughts. Let me give you an example. Maybe you're going into work and you're just feeling like, man, they always treat me bad. They're always talking about me behind my back. They never invite me to things. They're always, blah, blah, blah. And then when you get to work, what do you see? Every chat they have with one another, every little snicker they have with one another, every little exchange, or if they're on some sort of messaging system at work, you see the typing, you see the little exchanges, and you go, I knew it. They're after me. They don't like me. Story of my life. Right? What's really interesting is you and I know that that's probably not all about you, because the world doesn't revolve around you, right? But in that moment, we feel it, and we just feel that negativity, and we kind of feed it to ourselves, and our subconscious is looking for it. We walk in there, and you sit there and you go, there it is, I told you, I knew it, and you're patting your subconscious on the back going, you found it, good boy, good girl, you found it, keep looking for it. And what do you see every day? The same stuff. The reality is, some of that is not about you, maybe some is. Some of that is not about you. And so by you looking for it, you're finding it even when it's not there. The same is true for the positive, though. If you look for beauty in your life, if you look for positivity, if you look for someone being nice, someone doing something nice for someone else, suddenly your subconscious starts to look for that. And when it finds it, it brings it to your attention. And then you say, yeah, life is good. Yeah, there are nice people. Yeah, they do good things. That's right. Story of my life. This life is pretty good. And it's all in what you focus on and what you reinforce in your life. That's selective attention. That's confirmation bias. Excuse me. I'm going to read a verse from Philippians 4:18. This is from the Passion Translation. It says this: so keep your thoughts continually fixed on all that is authentic and real, honorable and admirable, beautiful and respectful, pure and holy, merciful and kind, and fasten your thoughts on every glorious work of God, praising him like always. What if we lived that way? What if we lived that way? We're going to have a better outlook on what's going on around us, even if it's bad. I'd rather have that. I'd rather have that. That's going to help you. Now, I got kind of 4 things I want to challenge you with, and we'll just put them all on the screen together. I want you to replace some thoughts. I want you to replace these thoughts. In fact, I want you to replace these thoughts. I want you to replace grumbling with gratitude. When you're grumbling, when you're like, I want you to think about something you ought to be grateful for. Like, reframe your perspective. I want you to replace pouting with prayer when you're like, you're over here. I want you to think about, okay, I need to pray to God. I need him to help me out in this scenario. I need him to come through for me in some way. I need him to change my mind and my thinking in some way. I would like you to replace complaining with encouragement. When you start to see yourself getting ramped up and your subconscious is like, I want you to think about encouraging somebody else as well as yourself. Encourage somebody else as well. Do you know how helpful it would be for you to pick one person and just encourage them each day? Because they're struggling with the same thing, I promise you. I want you to replace worry with worship. Worry with worship. So here's the thing. You can't worry and worship at the same time. You cannot be negative while you're intentionally being positive. It just doesn't work that way. But if you're intentionally positive and you're choosing to worship even when everything around you says something different, even when everything around you is coming down and closing down and shattering to pieces, if you're intentional about remembering who God is, who he says he is, what he says he'll do for you, and who you are in light of what he's done for you, things will change in your life. Your perspective will change, but not only your perspective, your environment, because you are a representative of Jesus in this life. And he wants to work through you in those bad situations that you find yourself in. And he wants to show the world his love through your love, through what you decide to do in this life. And if you'll make that declaration, if you'll say, you know what, I declare war on the negativity inside myself, on the stinking thinking, on the things that hold me back, on the self-sabotage, I declare war, a wolf will rise in your heart. And God will come behind you and give you fresh wind, fresh breath. Wind is the same word for spirit in the Bible. You want the Spirit of God at your back to refresh you. Declare war on the negativity in your own heart. I believe it's possible for every single one of us. Now, what's really interesting is maybe you're sitting there and you go, that's great if like someone's right at the edge of starting to have like bad, thought cycles and things, and they can kind of head it off right now. But I am pretty ingrained in my negative thought cycle. And I'm not looking at the painting almost being sold. I've already done that a few times. Okay? Here's the great thing. God uses shredded people to do his most glorious work. And he tells you you're worth it. And you know what's awesome about that Banksy painting? Okay? Not only was it shredded, but its value jumped because of the whole stunt, because the art wasn't just the piece of painting, it was the whole circumstance and the orchestration of all of it. And so now that painting is way more priceless than it was bought at. And even though the artist didn't mean for that to happen, that's what happened. That's you, that's me. You're a piece of art. You were created and you shredded yourself many times over, and God's using that and saying you're worth more than that. And I can do glorious things through you. So today, as you declare war on the negative thoughts in your mind, of the self-sabotage that you're looking at, I want you to remember to worship God in the moments when you don't feel like it, because that reframes your mind. I want you to know that God is around you, he is in you, and he wants to do glorious things through you, and you are above worth it. We're going to sing one last song together. And you may not have heard it, and it kind of repeats a lot, and it repeats a lot on purpose, because sometimes we need repetition to learn what something means. And I want you to kind of focus and meditate on these words, and as you feel like you want to rise, if you want to awaken the wolf within you, if you want to do all that, I'd love for you to join in the song and sing it with all you got and make this a declaration of war against the negativity that is inside of you, because God is coming behind you and he's got a fresh wind for you and you want it too. So I want to invite you into that.
is how I fight my battles. This 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 is how. In the valley, I know that you're with me. Surely your goodness and your mercy follows me. So my weapons are praise and thanksgiving, and this is how I fight my battles. And I believe you've overcome it. I will lift my song of praise for what you've done. This is how I fight my battles. This is how I fight my battles. This is how I fight my battles. This is how. This is how I fight my battles. This is how I fight my battles. This is how I fight my battles. This is how. Jesus, calling on your name is how we fight. With you we fight our battles. It may look like I'm surrounded, but I'm surrounded by you. It may look like I'm surrounded, but I'm surrounded by you. It may look like I'm surrounded, but I'm surrounded by you. It may look like I'm surrounded, but I'm surrounded by you.
Come on, sing with us.
Oh, it may look like I'm surrounded, but I'm surrounded by you, Lord. It may look like I'm surrounded, but I'm surrounded by you. It may look like I'm surrounded, but I'm surrounded by you. It may look like I'm surrounded, but I'm surrounded by you. 'Cause this is how I fight my battles. 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 Come on. This is how I fight my battles. This is how I fight my battles. This is how I fight my battles. This is how. It may look like I'm surrounded, but I'm surrounded by you. It may look like I'm surrounded, but I'm surrounded by you. Oh, it may look like I'm surrounded, but I'm surrounded by you. It may look like I'm surrounded, but I'm surrounded by you. This is how I fight my battles. And this is how I fight my battles. This is how I fight my battles. It may look like I'm surrounded, but I'm surrounded by you.
Father God, we believe,
It may look like I'm surrounded.
and we believe that you fight for us. And God, as a people, as a church, we declare war on all of those things that we struggle with, that we fight against. God, no more in our own power, no more in our own strength. But God, we trust in you. Will you guys all stand with us and sing this together?
Nothing is as strong as your love. Nothing I'm